It was a cold Friday night, and 16-year-old Jamie was finally home alone. His parents had gone out for dinner, planning to stay out late. For Jamie, this was a chance to enjoy some independence. He'd ordered a pizza, chosen a thriller to watch, and settled in for a cozy, quiet night. Outside, the chilly autumn wind rattled the trees, the leaves swirling through the dimly lit streets of his quiet neighborhood. Around 9 p.m., just as he was getting comfortable, Jamie heard a faint sound, a light scraping from the window by the living room. He paused the movie and listened, but the sound stopped. Probably just the wind, he thought, shrugging it off and pressing play. But a few minutes later, the sound came again, slow, deliberate scratching on the glass. Jamie felt a chill prickling his skin. This wasn't just the wind or branches, it sounded intentional. Swallowing hard, he muted the TV and stepped cautiously toward the window. Outside, the street was dark, and his porch light cast eerie shadows across the yard. Jamie squinted, searching the night. His heart froze when he finally saw it, a figure standing just outside the window. It was a clown. The clown was tall, wearing a faded, striped suit. Its face was painted white, with a broad red smile stretching from ear to ear, exaggerated and chilling in the dim light. Its eyes looked dark and empty, staring right at him. One gloved hand rested on the glass as if testing it. Then, slowly, the clown raised its other hand and gave Jamie a lazy, deliberate wave. Jamie stumbled back, his mind racing. This can't be real. It has to be a prank. His friends knew he was home alone, maybe someone was trying to scare him. He grabbed his phone to text Alex, his best friend, but his fingers trembled as he typed. The clown didn't move, just stood there, watching him with that twisted grin. Jamie forced himself to look away long enough to send the text, "You outside my window?" A moment later, Alex replied, "What? No, I'm at home." A deep unease crept over Jamie as he looked back to the window. The clown was gone. He released a shaky breath. Maybe it was a prank, he tried to convince himself. Or maybe I imagined it. He decided to lock all the doors and double-check the windows. Every time he glanced outside, his heart raced, expecting to see that grinning face staring back. But the clown was nowhere to be found. For the next hour, Jamie tried to shake the feeling of being watched. He forced himself to focus on his movie, keeping his phone close, but he couldn't ignore the creeping fear tightening in his chest. Around 10:30, he heard a knock on the front door. Jamie jumped, his pulse pounding. No one should be knocking at this hour. He held his breath, hoping it was a neighbor or someone who'd gotten lost. It tilted its head when he peered out, as if it could see him through the door. Jamie backed away, grabbing his phone. He dialed 911, whispering urgently to the operator that someone was outside his house, refusing to leave. She assured him that a patrol car was on its way and urged him to stay calm. The clown began to knock harder, louder this time, the steady rhythm echoing through the house. Jamie backed into the hallway, away from the door, clutching his phone tightly. Minutes passed like hours until, at last, he saw red and blue lights flashing outside. Relief flooded him as he peeked out the window, watching the police car pull up. The clown was gone again. 2 officers got out and knocked on the door. Jamie opened it quickly, explaining what had happened, his voice shaky. They searched the yard, the driveway, and the bushes, but there was no trace of anyone. No footprints, no sign of the clown at all. Could have been someone playing a prank, one of the officers suggested, though he looked as uneasy as Jamie felt. They promised to keep an eye on the area and left, leaving Jamie alone again. Jamie tried to go back to his movie, but every shadow seemed to twist into the clown's figure, every creak in the house making him jump. He decided to go to his room upstairs, where he could lock the door and wait until his parents came home. Hours passed, and Jamie finally began to drift off, his body tense but exhausted. Just as he was slipping into sleep, a faint, rhythmic tapping began at his bedroom window. His heart jolted as he sat up, dreading what he might see. He forced himself to look. The clown was there, crouched just outside his window, its face twisted in that same grotesque smile. It was closer now, so close he could see the cracks in its makeup, the dark, hollow eyes staring straight through him. It raised one finger to its lips, as if to hush him. Jamie scrambled back, but his room felt smaller, the walls closing in around him. He didn't dare scream. The clown pressed its hand against the window, leaning closer, fogging the glass with its shallow breath. Jamie was trapped. When Emma booked the cabin online, it seemed like the perfect retreat, nestled deep in the woods, far from the demands of city life. She arrived just before dusk yesterday, the fading light casting long, eerie shadows across the dense trees surrounding the secluded property. The cabin was quaint but cozy, and she felt an instant rush of relief. Finally, peace and quiet. But as she unpacked, she noticed a faint glow in the distance. Curiosity got the best of her, and she stepped out onto the porch to get a better look. Down a narrow trail, she could make out a flickering fire surrounded by a group of figures, their heads bowed, chanting something she couldn't make out. She shivered, feeling uneasy at the sight, yet something compelled her to watch. The group swayed in unison, their voices growing louder, almost hypnotic, until one of them, a tall figure draped in a dark cloak, suddenly looked up, meeting her gaze from what seemed like an impossible distance. Emma gasped, stumbling back into the cabin, quickly locking the door behind her. She told herself they were just campers or some local group and brushed it off as nothing more than strange. But that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The shadows seemed to stretch farther into the room, and the silence of the woods grew heavier, pressing in around her. Sleep came in fits, haunted by strange dreams of fire and chanting voices. Now, it was her second evening, and as the sky dimmed again, Emma found herself dreading the darkness. She paced around the cabin, checking her phone, but there was still no signal. The isolation that had once felt refreshing now made her feel trapped. Then, as if by some dreadful instinct, she found herself drawn back to the window, her gaze returning to the distant trail. The fire was there again, flickering in the growing darkness. This time, the figures were closer, their chanting echoing faintly through the trees. Emma's breath hitched. She could make out more details now, their faces painted with symbols, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if caught in some trance. The tall figure stood at the center again, their face hidden by the hood. Then, they stopped. Every head turned toward her cabin. Emma's heart raced as she staggered back, her mind racing. They can't see me, I'm too far away, she thought. But as she backed away, she noticed something else. One of them was pointing at her cabin. A chill ran down her spine as she heard footsteps in the distance. She locked the doors, closed the curtains, and turned off every light. She wanted to believe it was just her mind playing tricks, that the quiet and darkness of the woods were getting to her. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. As she backed into the corner of the room, she heard the soft crunch of footsteps growing closer. Then, a slow, deliberate knock echoed through the cabin, reverberating in the silence. Emma held her breath, her heart hammering. The knocks came again, louder this time, rattling the door. Whoever was out there was persistent. She clenched her fists, frozen, paralyzed by the horror of what might be waiting on the other side. Then came a voice, low and eerie. "We saw you watching, Emma." Her blood ran cold. "How do they know my name?" The voice continued, a slow, unnerving chant. "Come join us by the fire. Come be reborn." She clamped a hand over her mouth, desperately willing herself not to scream. She forced herself to stay silent, to stay hidden, but then she heard it, the soft creak of a window sliding open somewhere in the cabin. She'd locked the doors, but she hadn't checked the windows. She bolted for the bathroom, locking herself inside. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, filling the cabin with an unnatural hum. She could hear footsteps echoing through the hall, soft but deliberate, closing in on her. Her phone was in her pocket, but it was useless without service. She gripped it anyway, holding it like a lifeline as the footsteps stopped just outside the bathroom door. The handle rattled, then twisted slowly. Emma held her breath, her heart pounding so loud she was sure they'd hear it. "Come join us, Emma." The voice whispered through the door. "The fire awaits." The doorknob twisted violently, and with a sickening thud, something heavy slammed against the door, over and over, the wood splintering with each impact. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for whatever was coming. The pounding stopped, leaving an oppressive silence. She dared to open her eyes, and for a moment, all was still. She let out a shaky breath, daring to hope it was over. But then, slowly, the door creaked open. The tall figure stood there, silhouetted by the faint light from the hallway. Their face was hidden, but she could feel their eyes on her, cold and relentless. Before she could scream, before she could move, they stepped forward, a gloved hand reaching out. The last thing Emma saw was the flicker of fire in their eyes as they pulled her into the darkness. The cabin was left empty, the silence swallowing the faint echoes of chanting that drifted through the trees. Annalise had lived alone in Millbrook for years, a sleepy town where she knew most people by name. One evening, she made a quick run to the local supermarket, enjoying the late hour when the place was mostly empty. She was browsing the soup aisle when a man appeared beside her, his sudden presence jolting her. "It's a quiet town, isn't it?" he said, smiling in a way that was almost too friendly. "Yes, very," she replied, inching her cart away, but he stayed close. "I'm new here," he continued. "Funny running into someone as friendly as you." He leaned in slightly, his eyes unblinking. She forced a polite smile. "I should get going," she said, hoping he'd take the hint. "Oh, no need to rush," he said, still smiling. "I'm Paul, by the way." He extended a hand, and she reluctantly shook it, finding his grip strangely warm and lingering. "Annalise," she replied quickly, pulling her hand back. "Nice to meet you. You live around here, Annalise?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost too curious. "Yes," she lied, looking for an excuse to escape. "But it's late, and I should go." "Oh, of course," he said, but his eyes didn't leave her face. "Maybe I'll see you around." "Maybe," she murmured, turning to head for the register. She didn't dare look back as she checked out and hurried to her car, feeling his gaze linger long after she'd left the store. When she got home, she felt a sense of relief, but unease lingered. Later, she found herself glancing out the window, feeling almost as if someone were watching her. The next morning, as she stepped out onto her front porch, she froze. There, lying on her doormat, was a single red carnation. Her stomach twisted. No one had any reason to leave her flowers, especially not at her doorstep. She brushed it off as a coincidence, but something about it felt wrong. The following day, another carnation appeared, this time with a note wrapped around the stem, "Thinking of you, Annalise. Paul." Her pulse quickened. How did he find out where I live? She wondered, her fingers tightening around the note. That unsettling friendliness from the supermarket now felt like a thin disguise. Shaken, she decided to report it to the police, hoping they'd understand her fear. The officer listened with concern but admitted there wasn't much they could do without evidence of a crime. "Just keep your doors locked and stay vigilant," he advised. That night, she made sure every window and door was bolted, drawing the curtains tightly. She lay awake for hours, straining to hear every creak and rustle outside. Eventually, she drifted into a restless sleep, only to be jolted awake by a soft knock on her front door. Her heart pounded as she held her breath, praying it was a mistake, but the knock came again, louder this time, steady and deliberate. She stayed silent, gripping her phone, debating whether to call for help, when she heard a low voice through the door. "Annalise." It was Paul's voice, gentle, almost pleading. "I just wanted to see you again. Please, open the door." She crept out of bed, her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. She whispered her address to the emergency operator, barely able to breathe as she waited for the sound of sirens. Paul continued to speak, his voice a soft murmur, as if coaxing her to answer. "Annalise, I know you're in there. It's lonely out here." The doorknob rattled, and her heart raced, but she stayed still, frozen by fear. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, she heard sirens approaching. She stayed huddled in her room, peeking through the window as a patrol car pulled up. Paul had vanished, leaving only the faint, unsettling echo of his voice in her mind. The officers assured her they'd searched the area, though they found no trace of him. Days passed without another visit, and though her fear slowly faded, she kept her doors locked, feeling safe only when she could see both her porch and the street from the safety of her window. But one night, as she sat quietly, the doorbell rang again. Her heart sank. She checked her phone, wanting to call the police but feeling as if she were overreacting. She peered out the peephole, her breath catching when she saw a flash of red, a single carnation lying on her doorstep, a note attached. As she opened it with trembling hands, she read the words scrawled in a neat, haunting script, "I'm not leaving."